And that's when it really hit me. I'm like, dude, what am I doing here? I always felt like I was in the wrong place. I'm like, I need to do something about my freedom here. I need to be able to get passive income. And that's to do something for me as a career and also be there for the family.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a brand new listener or a longtime listener, thank you for being back for another episode. The title of today's episode is Finding Identity and Purpose with Real Estate Investing, an Ambitious Mom's Journey. This is an interview with Maria Fristro, and I had so much fun talking to Maria. We talked about her background, being born in Finland, moving to Sweden, eventually immigrating to the United States, and that whole process and that journey, but also her journey into real estate investing that, like all of us, is very personal. Had a lot of personal motivations. For her, she was in a career in Silicon Valley, was even making pitches and having interviews with the Treasury secretary at some point. She has a funny story about that. But really got into the personal side of, as a mom, with a new baby, kind of struggling with this back and forth of ambition and have this career and also want to be home with my kid, and actually found a nice happy medium with real estate investing where she was able to kind of have that as an outlet. And she tells some funny stories about trying to apply for loans and meeting with a banker while the baby is with her. And just so much, she has such a great sense of humor. And it's so real, but also so many great tips and strategies about creative financing, about making requests to banks for loans, about the types of properties you buy and with rental properties, but also just getting that first deal and what that's like. They bought a property in Fort Collins. So lots and lots of good details in this journey, lots of lessons, and also just challenges for all of us about why are we investing in real estate? What are we trying to accomplish? We discuss some of my own book and some of the struggles that I have too about balancing ambition and finding a good life and finding where kind of your enough is and your happy medium. So all of that and more in today's episode. Now, before we get to the interview, it's time for my weekly behind the scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on with me and my real estate investing, my finances, or my business behind the scenes. And this week, I want to talk about something that I've been trying to work on to help us and our family go to Spain. So just to give you context, we are moving to Spain. I've talked about that in a prior podcast episode. We're doing that hopefully in July of 2022. I'm recording this late March, getting into early April. And so we're beginning the process, as I told you in a prior episode, of renting our house out and advertising it. And one of the biggest obstacles I'm finding, and I'm remembering from our prior trips in 2017, is getting rid of junk in our house. Now, by junk or stuff, could be anything, could be like literally just pieces of paper or stuff that needs to be thrown away. There's also this amorphous stuff that, oh, well, we could keep that to use for this thing or whatever it might be. But I'm telling you that this is one of the most difficult parts of leaving and going on a trip, is getting the mental energy to focus and to get rid of that stuff. And it reminded me of a quote I want to read you from Henry David Thoreau, one of my favorite thinkers, a transcendentalist, kind of vagabond philosopher from the 1800s in the United States. And here was his quote when he was talking about being able to live a deliberate life and do some of the things he wanted to do. He said, "I have also in mind that seemingly wealthy and most terribly impoverished class of all, those who have accumulated dross." Now, dross, my understanding, is an old-fashioned word for stuff or junk. At least that's how I interpret it. He said, "Those who have accumulated dross but not know how to use it or get rid of it, and thus have forged their own golden or silver fetters." In other words, they have shackles, they have chains, so their stuff is chaining them to their existing lives. They can't grow or change or do something different. So I'm living that quote at the moment, realizing there's stuff that our family's accumulated. And I just want to give you a practical tip, something I think one of my friends, Joe Breslin, he's in a mastermind group that he and another friend of ours, Anthony, have been talking about real estate investing and helping each other out for years now. And I remember at one point he gave this advice: when you're trying to get rid of stuff, when and the way I'm thinking about it in my world is, you either have some stuff that goes in the trash, this obvious trash, have a big trash bag. You have some stuff that's obviously going to keep. You put that in storage. It's those in-between things that are really difficult, when you might justify and say, well, wait a minute, that, I really might need that 10 years from now or 5 years from now. You don't need it now. It's not like a valuable heirloom, but you just want to think, well, I might need it. Well, the way Joe kind of helped me think about that, he said, go ahead and throw that thing away, because even if you have to buy it again, whether you buy it used or buy it new, just look at the cost of buying that again as a storage fee. So for whatever reason, that really clicked with me. That when you get rid of it, it frees up your life now. You can just move on from that thing. And if you're literally moving, like we're putting stuff in storage and renting our house out, it's very helpful to be able to get rid of stuff, but psychologically to know that it's not forever. Like I can get that thing back. It's just going to cost me money. And yes, money is an obstacle, right? But it's not the biggest deal. Having all this stuff, as Henry David Thoreau says, is what actually chains you to the evolution and the change you want to make. In our case, we want to go abroad. We want to live there. And for a lot of people, don't do that because you have all this stuff that's holding you down. Yes, the money is the practical obstacle to paying for the trip and all that. But what I've experienced in the past, is just the stuff and the obligations and the commitments. They root you to the ground, and not always in a good way. Sometimes they keep you from doing the things you want to do. So hopefully that little tip is a reminder that I started thinking about this weekend. So Joe, thank you if you're listening. I don't know if you listen to my podcast, but appreciate that tip to look at throwing things away in that middle ground where you just can't figure out what to do with it. Go ahead and toss it. Look at it as something as a storage fee when you buy it back. Hopefully that helps you out. That's where I'm living. I'll give you some more updates in some future podcasts, how it goes. We are getting it on the market here in the next week. Hopefully we can get it rented out to help us pay for our housing in Spain. If you like these behind the scenes segments with me on the podcast, I want to invite you to stay in touch with me beyond the podcast by checking out one of the online courses that I offer. Online courses are a way to interact with me and let me help you with your real estate investing. Some courses are available anytime, and others, like my premier course, Real Estate Deal School, is more of a boot camp style course where you and other students go through live with me as I help you step by step in purchasing your next investment property. You can get details on all of these courses at coachcarson.com/courses. Now let's get started with today's interview with Maria. Hey, Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so good to connect with you. We've, like a lot of my online, connections these days, like Instagram started this thing. You were really nice enough to message me and let me know about you read the book, and you and your husband read the book, and just had some very kind words to say about it. Thank you. And then I heard you recently on the Bigger Pockets podcast, and just an amazing interview, which I'm going to link to that in the show notes too, just so people can check that out. But just really appreciate what you're doing and your feedback and being willing to come share.
Well, likewise. I mean, like I told you, you've had a huge impact on our family's life. So this is quite a treat for me to be here today talking to you. Finally, quite a fangirl moment.
Well, thank you. Likewise, it's a treat for me as well. And I would love to, I love stories, and I think people love to know the origin of where, because I want to talk about your real estate. I want to talk about what you're up to now with a sabbatical year. But I think going back to, I'm just curious how you were born in Finland, if I'm not mistaken, right? And yeah. I'm just curious, kind of that journey to get to where you were working in the United States and Silicon Valley. I'm just curious the kind of connection all the way back to Finland.
Yeah, it's funny. Anytime somebody asks me to tell about yourself, my hands start sweating, and I love talking, but even so, and I think there's a reason. So if I can tell you this story first, when I did work in Silicon Valley, I got to work with some pretty cool clients. And one of them was Timothy Geithner, who is the former Secretary of the Treasury. I'm like, no big deal. Who's just number 4 to become president or whatever, something happened. So I'm like, I'm sitting there. This was during the days when I was still wearing high heels and fancy clothes and not just Dickies and yoga pants that I'm wearing now. So we're sitting there. It's floor 42 of his hedge fund or whatever that he's running now. And we're sitting in his fancy office waiting for him to come in. And it's me and my team, and my boss's boss is there with me. So it's a big deal. And he comes in, and my boss's boss is like, well, Mr. Secretary, let's begin with, how should we address you? And he's like, oh God, no, dude, just call me Tim. By the way, he's an awesome dude. So he's takes off his tie and throws it on the floor, whatever, just call me Tim, super relaxed. I'm like, oh, he's a chill dude. So we take turns introducing ourselves around the table. And then when it comes comes to me when it's my turn, I look at him and I'm like, well, my name is Maria, but you can call me ma'am. And I thought it was such a good joke, but like nobody laughs. The room goes quiet. And after that, I'm like, okay, have been nervous whenever it's my turn to say anything. Huh. Did you even know how I came from Finland to Silicon Valley? There was a couple stops in between, but did you know that the US has a lottery for green cards every year?
I'm vaguely familiar with it. And my familiarity there's a lot more people applying than get it. I remember. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so it's like 55,000 people every year wins the green card lottery. And that means that you win a chance to like apply, basically. It's not like, oh, we'll send it through the mail. So I grew up in Finland. We moved to Sweden when I was 5 years old. My dad, it was pretty rough times in Finland. The currency was not doing so great, and it was like a huge financial crisis back then. And my dad had just finished his school, so he was a civil engineer, but couldn't get work. So it was tough times. And my mom, during that same period, she's a nurse, registered nurse, but she was in an accident, so she was paralyzed. And we were 4 kids. Everybody was like under 4 years old. had us pretty quickly. So we had a tough time getting by. And my dad got a job offer from Stockholm, Sweden. So they kind of packed this all up, and we moved to Sweden to get a better life. And my dad had an awesome job there, and lived in Stockholm for almost 20 years, something like that. And life took took me back to Finland, where I met my husband. We went to Hong Kong for a little bit. Wow. And my husband has 9 siblings, so they're a huge family. And a part of them are married to Americans, and they live in the US. And I've always had a big love for the US. My grandpa's brother moved to the US 60 years ago. So I've also had family here. And when we were dating, we came to California, my husband and I. Cool. And I'm like, this is where I'm going to live one day. So it became our goal. And ever since, my husband started applying for the green card lottery. So every year they do this. So we did. And one year we're in Stockholm at this point, and I get a letter. And I'm like, dude, I think I got some sort of Kenya letter, because it was funky looking. I open it and I'm like, no, Visa. My husband's name is Visa. I'm like, I think I just won the green card lottery.
Wow, it's like the sweepstakes. You got it. It's the letter. Yes.
Yeah. So weird. So it sounds so easy when you talk about it now, but it was quite the process. So going through like a bunch of interviews, and you need to show that you're healthy and that you have either a job or money or relatives, and jump through a lot of hoops. But we got it, and then I quit my job in Stockholm that I loved. I worked for a brand experience agency, and came to Silicon Valley like.
Here I am. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, when you came here, did either one of you have job opportunities like set, or is it just you get the green card and then you go search out jobs from there?
So my husband, he got a job before we moved through his company. So he worked for a large global telecom company. So it wasn't easy, though. It's not that you just flip a switch. I'm like, no, I'm going to take this job now. Yeah. So he worked a lot to get that. So he went ahead of me, moved by himself. He's like, looking back at this time, like, I don't know what the hell I was doing. He was thrown into this huge ass meetings, high stakes. And so he took a big leap of faith there to go and kind of, I don't like the saying fake it till you make it, but wearing a bigger suit and grew into it.
Right. Wow. Just that part of the journey is so amazing. And I know other people who are listening to this who've had to emigrate or from whatever country will appreciate that. And so once you came, you're in this new environment, you're both in the corporate world and you're working. I assume you both kind of got into that.
Yeah.
I guess let's fast forward a little bit, because I do want to, at some point you were working those jobs and was it you decided to buy a property? Was it your husband? Like, I'm curious how that, like, where did that come from? Was that just another kind of random thing, or was that more deliberate?
Yeah, we always talked about it. So back in the day, this is almost like 20 years ago when we started dating or like first got married, we started a club, an investment club. And it sounds so fancy, but basically we were like eating sausage in the sauna, as you do in Finland.
Yeah.
And had our friends and we read books, like the little book on investing and those types of like easy books. And that's also when we read Rich Dad, Poor Dad together. And we knew like we want to get into real estate. So the seed was sown. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Back a long time ago. And then we even looked at some apartments, but then life took over. And that's when we moved to Sweden and then Hong Kong and kind of started focusing on careers instead. But that lived with me. And then I had a colleague at the company that I worked for in Silicon Valley who listened to Bigger Pockets. And she talked to me about it and I started listening. And then both of us had babies. And that's when things shifted. I had bought my first investment, a real estate investment, before my first was born. And that's when everything changed.
Right. So Bigger Pockets, the investing club, and that's really cool that you were in the sauna talking real estate, talking Kiyosaki. I could just imagine that scene. I think that's so cool. Like why should we have meetups in hotel rooms? We could be in like saunas. Like, that's perfect.
Yeah, and I think what I want to say with that is that it sounds so easy when I tell my story. And I'm like, yeah, and then I looked at houses out of state, and then I just bought one. I'm like, well, actually, I started 20 years ago when I first started thinking about it. I started reading about it, and then worked to get the money. So basically, we worked for 15 years to gather the money that we had supposed to buy our own house with. But then instead, I bought this investment property with it.
Right. The first house for everybody seems special, right? Whether it's just a challenge to get over that mental and practical hurdle. But so you were working for 15 years, saving money. You and your husband. You bought out of state, so you were still renting in California, and so you bought in Fort Collins. Is that right? Fort Collins, Colorado.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so do you remember in terms like how you financed that deal? Like, is it just a typical 20% down and get a traditional loan?
Yeah. Went super traditional, and I made a huge mistake that I want to share. So we got a conventional bank loan, put 20% down. The price was $285,000, which was a lot of money for us. And I mean, it still is. So we put like $70,000 down, which was all our savings at that point that we had saved for a long time. And right before we were closing, I'm like, I'm going to pay off my car loan because I thought that was a good thing. And I paid it off. And the guy that I got the loan from, he's like, no, what did you just do? Because my credit was so young and I only had so few credit lines. So my credit score just tanked and I had to pay even more. So we paid 5.125% for that loan.
Wow. That just shows you how non-intuitive the credit game is, right? Because you had new credit, you needed to season it more. Okay, that makes sense.
And also, I want to talk about, I mean, it wasn't the perfect deal. Now that I look back at it, I would have never bought it because the cash flow wasn't enough. The cash and cash return was kind of crap. And so I maybe want to say that to some listeners that sometimes it's better to get an okay deal. And also think about, hey, do I need, because we had good jobs and income. I didn't buy this apartment or this house. I mean, I didn't buy this investment for cash flow. I bought it for tax reasons. I bought it for wanting to get into the game. So it was an okay deal. And now after 6 years, it's actually an awesome deal. So we're getting ready to sell this and we're probably going to be able to sell it over 600,000. So it's now it is an awesome deal.
Yeah, I want to come back around because I think the story will come back to where you are now because you're sitting in Fort Collins in this house that you bought. But at that time when you bought it, you mentioned it wasn't great cash flow. Do you remember what the rent was when you paid $285? You got a 20% down loan. Like, what was the cash flow on that, or what was the rent on that? The total rent?
Yeah, we paid. No, they paid. Hold on. Did we start out at like $1,625 or something like that?
Right.
The rent, and I think if we didn't have any maintenance issues or anything like that, it cash flow like $100,
Right.
but most of the time it was like zero.
Right. Got it. Yeah, I think this is an important topic. Like I've heard David Green talk about this a lot on the Bigger Pockets. I've talked about it some. Like there's these, there's a cash flow deal, and then there's a really well located just growth type deal. And I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying is that you had a good job, you both made a good income, you had good credit, you had to get in the game. I mean, it's like a base hit in baseball. Like there's the simplest deal that gets you in the game that's safe. Like you probably weren't going to get killed on that deal. You might have gotten cut a little bit, all right, here's some negative cash flow. Here's some negative cash flow, but you weren't, you had a 30-year loan. You had a property that, was in a good location.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it wasn't like you're going to get killed on that deal, but in the long run, we're going to come back to the deal. Like those deals, it's not guaranteed, but they tend to go up in value. And those are more like almost like a growth stock in the stock market. Those are they're not going to make a bunch of dividends, but they are going to tend to go up in value.
So Chad, that's something I want to talk to you about. Actually, I've gotten some questions from people who are like, hey, I've saved. I have this one woman who I'm really inspired by. She contacted me a few days ago and she's like, I've saved since I was 14 years old. I've saved $89,000 and I'm looking into buying my first. Like, what should I buy? Type of question. And the way I think about that is I have a few questions I would ask back, and I'd love to hear your take on this as well. So number one is, do you need money now or later? And number two is, what gets you excited? Like, what's your strategy? And the money now or later will help you define what your strategy is to determine what is your most important metric for money, for return. So for me, for the longest period of time, it's been velocity of money. I don't care as much about cash on cash return or cash flow, because it was more like, how fast can I grow my net worth was my thing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think those are perfect questions to ask them. Like, what's your goal? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? I think this distinction between like growth properties and cash flow properties, like there's a lot of in betweens too. Like my favorite deals are the ones that get a little bit of both. Like I think it's not an either or. Like if you're in California and you're buying property, you're just gonna have to go for growth. Like you're not gonna make a bunch of cash flow unless you buy a big multifamily or some kind of commercial property. Whereas if you I interviewed somebody recently from Detroit, and if you're in Detroit, there are certain parts that are going to have a little bit of growth, but you're probably going to have mostly cash flow. But then there's other parts of the country, like I'm in South Carolina, and we have a net population inflow. And like I've looked at the historical neighborhoods in my area, like it's probably, a 6 or 7% cap rate would be like, you just paid if you had no debt on the property, a 6 or 7% cap rate on a residential property would be a pretty good deal. Plus you're probably getting like a 3% growth rate, right? So like the total return is about 9 to 10% if you didn't have any debt on it, which is solid. That's very comparable to other asset classes. But then if you go to San Francisco or something, I have friends who bought properties there. They got like a 2% cap rate, at best, but then they got maybe a 6% growth rate or 7%. And, so I think the bigger question, and this is something I want to talk about more on the podcast and YouTube too, is like, not only like, does it fit you more like your friend? Like that's a perfect question. Like which one of those, are you someone who has enough staying power to buy a growth property? Can you afford to do that for a while to get to the end? But also like, what's your investment philosophy? Like I think a lot of people, even if they did have the staying power, it just makes them nervous to have the speculation on that most of my return is going to come from growth and not from cash flow. And so like in the book, in the Retire Early with Real Estate book, I showed like two different examples. Like you could just do cash flow properties and use the debt snowball to pay your properties off. And you could get there just as fast as using like a growth strategy where the property grows and you sell it and refinance it and do a BRRRR strategy. So it's really like, they're both reasonable, but it's like, each of us has probably a gut feeling like, ooh, that makes me really nervous to buy speculative properties. And another person's like, I don't want to deal with cash flow and all that stuff. I'd rather just buy 1 or 2 properties, let them grow. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of my thoughts on it.
I like that. And also, how active do you want to be in it, right? So what's your risk tolerance and how much do you want to put sweat equity, but also brain power into it? What's it worth? Exactly. I like that.
So, but I love that you got started. Like, I think that's just a message that so many people who are new to this game is they're trying to wait for that perfect deal. and you got into it. Like you started 20 years before that, like in the investment sauna, and then you got your job, you saved money, you listened to Bigger Pockets, you got started. So from there though, like, and this is where it got interesting. And I wanted to spend a lot of time talking about this, is that you became a mom. Like, this is a huge transformation, and me as a dad, and I know with my wife too, just understanding what that means in terms for those parents out there, kind of that lifestyle change. You at that point, was it right away that you decided you left your career, or were you still working while you had your baby? I'm just curious how that progression went from a career standpoint.
Yeah, it was a tough decision for me to have kids. I've always wanted them. I thought that I would have them when I was young, but somehow it scared me. I got so focused on my career that I wanted to keep doing it. And at some point, my husband's like, dude, if we're going to have kids, it's going to happen now. So, and it also took us 2 years to get pregnant. So it was hard for us to get pregnant. And actually, we got cats before we got pregnant. And on Monday, when I went to pick up the kittens, I was pregnant that same Friday. So I guess something happens to like dog and kitten moms.
Yeah, there you go.
So it kind of surprised me when I did have Lucas, our oldest. I went back to work when he was 5 months old, which was unheard of in my company. For 25 years, nobody had ever been home that long. I got a couple months extra because I wanted to take him to Finland and show him to the family. I also, during birth, and this is going to get graphic, but during labor, I found out after a few months, I had a hard time sitting, and people are like, well, it hurts to give birth. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but this, like, something's off. So it turns out my tailbone, I fractured my tailbone during labor. So I had a hard time sitting for like 6 to 9 months. So it was hard to sit and work. But I went back after 5 months, and I'm sitting there in the massage room of the company, and I'm hooked to the hands-free breast pump situation. And that's when it really hit me. I'm like, dude, what am I doing here? And our kid was at this daycare that just felt, she was wonderful, but just not right. Always rushing, taking him there, always in traffic, always late everywhere, always felt like I was in the wrong place. I'm like, I need to do something about my freedom here. I need to be able to get passive income. And that's when it hit me. But I had a really hard time with identity and like crisis going from that mode. I don't think I was made to be like a stay-at-home mom. My mom loved it. Even though, it would have been nice of her not to be bedridden for most of it. But even with that, she loved, like, that was the best time of my life when we were home. And I'm like, well, I kind of miss work. So I wanted to be able to combine the both, to do something for me as a career and also be there for the family.
And so is that kind of real estate seed was already sown? You had already bought the property, but was that tension you had between, I want to be there with my son, I want to be a mom, but I also have this like urge to contribute and to work and to do that. And so real estate investing kind of rekindled itself at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I want to talk to you about. I recently started reading this book. If you haven't, I think it's amazing that I wanted to share, because I think for me, the biggest challenge that I've always had, but also especially after kids and family, is being pulled in between, like having the high drive and being content with where you are. And a book called, and this was a recommendation that I got through Instagram, so thank you, The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life by David Brooks.
Ooh, that book's on my list and I have not read it, but David, yeah, that's a really interesting book.
Yeah. So basically, and this is exactly what happened to me. So a lot of us, especially if we're high drive, type A type of personalities that are born with a lot of motivation. And some people are like, how do I get motivated? I'm like, how do I get rid of this? So I get toggled in between, like, enjoy the moment with the kids. And I'm like, but I'm not completely fulfilled by this. And it feels so ugly to say, But being at home with kids like the whole day, I'm like, I'm drained. Right? A part of me is fulfilled. Like, I love it. I love my kids, but I need something else. So, how do I find that balance? So, I was climbing that mountain. I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm sitting down with freaking the secretary of the Treasury, Ego, so much ego. I made good money. I had fancy clothes. I ate at nice restaurants, stayed at the nice hotels in Hawaii, whatever. And then one crash that I came down was leaving my job and like moving to Finland. So that was a part of like losing my identity a little. Another big one was I was taken acutely in the hospital, almost losing my life. So that was also like, but then the big one was losing our third child, bearing Millie. That's when I'm like, dude, I've been up the wrong mountain. And so I love how these two metaphors are from your book. You talk about climbing the mountain and enjoying the plateau. So during this year, we've been like the year of sabbatical, we've been enjoying the plateau, but I've been struggling with like, I haven't been happy. I'm like, I need to get back on the mountain, but how do I do that? And now this book kind of gives me the next step of like, oh, the second mountain. If the first mountain was about acquisition, about ego, and I felt like I've lost part of myself. Now it's about actually being okay dying, a part of me dying, the like ugly parts of like the ego and because like, I need to make as much money as I did in Silicon Valley. I'm like, do I? Do I really? And your book helped me so good in that because so many of the people that you interviewed didn't have so many apartments or houses. It was like 10 to 15. I'm like, I don't want 100 or 500. And I think that's my challenge to people listening too. Like, do you really need as much as you think you need? So now the second mountain that I'm hoping to climb is one of contribution, one of giving back to the community and like building, not so much thinking about how am I going to grow, but thinking about how I can help others grow. And that's yeah, I'm early. I'm an early climber, like taking the first steps, but yeah, something I'm passionate to talk about.
Wow, that's so beautiful and challenging to me too, Maria. And I, as a host of a podcast, I almost feel like, it's funny to say this, but like an imposter syndrome myself of like, you're supposed, as a host, or you're somebody who's supposed to have like things figured out. Like I wrote a book on something, like to me, I'm the number one audience of that book of like saying, Chad, you need to slow down. Like you're so ambitious. And I resonate very much with what you're saying of, it's never been about like finding motivation. I'm just like, where can I need to slow this motivation down. And that's not everybody, right? Like I think there's I think it's self-awareness to recognize, all right, this is our personality. This is how we're driven. There's some people who like, they need to be around these like super motivated people just to kind of get pulled along. Right. But I think in our unique situation, speaking for myself, it's very much been about, I needed the sabbaticals. Like my wife has been really helpful for me on this. Like we sort of balanced each other in a way. Like we went in 2009 before we had kids to Spain and I needed Latin America personally. Like Latin America is my like soul place because they're beautiful people and there's so many different cultures there, but a lot of the slowness of enjoying family, enjoying friends, it was just part of the culture. And so it was easy for me to kind of go along with that, enjoy the food, enjoy this. At the same time, though, I feel this tension that you're talking about that of ambition, because the ambition's there. Like, I feel like it's a gift, like you're given a gift of talent and you're a creative and you're a designer and you've got these gifts that are inside of you. And when you don't use your gifts, they start, bothering you. Like it's like the gift becomes a bad thing. It becomes a burden to you. So like, I totally get what you're saying. And I'm also in the process. Like I do not have this thing figured out, but part of my kind of practice, I felt like the getting bigger and getting more houses was my first realization was when I tested that. I tested getting the team and growing all the, hundreds of properties a year and doing all that. And for me personally, it just wasn't as fulfilling because it didn't have the balance that I wanted and the flexibility. But the thing I'm playing around with is contribution as well, is how can the ambition for me is like, okay, well, what if Maria buys 10 properties, and what if these other people I'm talking to buy another 5 properties, and like, what if there's 1,000 people who buy 5 or 10 properties each? Now we're talking thousands of units, but it's not just me, it's like all these other people. So that as a teacher, like teaching has kind of been, I found that as be my fulfillment, and it's a way to channel some ambition while still not being all about me. It's like a teacher has to focus on the other people who they're trying to help.
I love that. Like, it's about doing together. I realized this year, now that I've had time, I'm like, it doesn't really matter what I do as long as I can do and give back, and especially as a team with other people. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. And we actually, I was just in Park City a week ago with the people that I went to the Maui Masterclass with, and we were talking about, people think that we go there and meet each other and talk about, like, how can we make more money? But actually focus was a lot. We talked about our kids and family, and we talked about how can we like buy a house together and then let somebody live in it for free? Or like, how can we do cool things that we all say we're going to do, but it doesn't, we don't still make it a priority. Like we kind of all felt phony a little bit. Or imposters, and all this time, the 5 years or 6 years that I've been doing, I'm like, I'm gonna give back, and I'm like, why don't I? Right. So,
that's cool.
And also, so I want to talk about one more thing, because I realized something during this year is it's so much about a decision. So one of the guys that I met in Maui, he's like, Maria, I want to do what you're doing. Like, you guys are traveling, you're spending time with the kids. And I'm like, dude, why don't you? I know your net worth. It's bigger than mine. You just do it. So a lot of times it's just that what needs to happen for us to take the plunge. And, I hate to say for me, it was earth shattering, and a part of me did die with our baby dying. So that's why I'm like, I want to be able to help others like realize that and not wait for something that huge to happen.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing and being willing to share personal parts of your life that are really difficult, and that I think all of us listening to that appreciate it, but also learn from it. And it is a service. It's a service to me and other people listening, because I know, speaking personally, like I get wrapped up in my identity as a person working, as a investor, but then you're just sharing your journey. Like, it's real. Like, it's what am I? Am I a career person? Am I a mom? Am I an investor? Like, we can't all go back and forth between, and it really is a game of that, right? I mean, I know we're buying properties, but we're all trying to be happy. We're all trying to be fulfilled, and we're trying to figure this thing out. Like, nobody's got a recipe for it, right?
Yeah. Well, have you read The Gap and the Gain?
I have not. No.
Okay,
good book recommendations here. All right.
Yeah,
good.
Add that to your list to the top. So one way, because I'm thinking like, why don't I feel as jacked up after a day with the kids as I do after a day of like setting my goals, or sitting with my strategy for next year, or looking at how the hockey stick on my net worth goes up, Mm-hmm. I'm like, what is wrong with me? And then I realized, I'm looking at it wrong. And in The Gap in the Game, they teach you a new way of looking at success. So redefining what success looks like. And I used to be like, I will be successful when I'm a millionaire. Well, I, made that. After that, it was, I'll be successful when I 10x that. Okay. And then what? Well, then it'll be something else. And I switched that now, just recently, after having read the book, to I know I'm being successful when. And I wrote down things like, when I make my kids giggle, when I goof around with my husband. And I realized, when was the last time we goofed around and just like, I don't know, played board games, or I did things together. And so you gamify it. All of a sudden I have a metric. I can tick stuff off. I'm like, I made my kids laugh. And then you can start counting it. I don't know. Yeah. So I think there's something to the like gamification, or something to us highly driven people that we need It seems
I'm
funky.
totally with you on the checklist thing. Like
I'm like ashamed when I talk
I
about
know,
this,
me
but I'm
too.
like, ah.
Yeah, some people listening to this and be like, you really can't naturally just like be with your kids. I'm like, no, I've got to check it off the list. Like when I've had my project time where like, oh, I did some art with my daughter for an hour, like so cool. Like,
Yeah.
but for me, that's like, I got to check that off the list because
Yeah.
it's just the way my mind works for better or worse. Right. You know, just,
Yeah.
that's just it.
Same.
So yeah, you can look at it and quantify it, I guess is my point, but that's for better or
Yeah.
worse. That's just where my head is.
Also, I like the fact that you talked about your wife because that's something that Brandon also does. He's like, I know I'm doing too much of the wrong things when Heather says I am. When he's just like, you're talking too much, you're working too much.
Right.
So I think that's a good thing too to have somebody outside to be like
Yep.
your wake up call.
Yeah, and I want to go back to identity, and you know, this is particular. I've had this conversation with my wife a lot, and she's kind of struggled with it. But I think it's not just it is a mom thing, but it's also a dad thing too, of this identity of parenting, and how can we find this balance between like your job and your work and your career purpose and your kids. And I'm going to tell you kind of something I'm thinking, but I want to get your thoughts on this as you're kind of living it and thinking about it too. Like a lot of my tension has been like, yes, I would love to spend it would be nice in theory to spend, 8 o'clock to 5 with my kids. I've thought about homeschooling, for example, when we're traveling.
Oh,
I'm like, that'd be
me
great.
too.
Wouldn't that be great? It'd be so flexible. And then we start doing it. And I'm like, oh no, like this is not working. And
It's terrible.
it's there. It doesn't work for me at all. And I feel very selfish about that because I'm like, well, where's my time to read? And where's my time to do all this
Yeah.
stuff? And so like, but the tension I'm kind of playing with is that I want to involve my kids in the things that I'm passionate about and the contributions I'm making, because ultimately they're going to be adults and they're going to have to go. And this is not only like me being with them in homeschool would be one thing, and that has to happen. Somebody's got to teach the kids. And I love elementary school teachers for what they do, right? It's just their skill set is amazing. But for them in my life, it's them observing me making a YouTube video, or them observing me going out to a property and walking around this property and seeing that, and just them getting to soak in this adult and this could be, and for moms, I think this is like a big deal for them to see a mom who is out there contributing and who's skilled and who's got creativity and who's a professional. Like if that's your role, then that's great for your kids to be. So trying to involve them in that professional as much as possible, let them be like a fly on the wall. So that's kind of my thought lately. You have any kind of thoughts on how you're doing that for yourself?
I just want to say amen to everything that you just said, because in theory, I've talked about homeschooling as well now, and I never thought I would. And in theory, it sounds amazing, but everybody I've talked to, they have a spouse who's 100% homemaker. That kind of makes it possible. So I want to see how you can do that as a community. And I'd love to be able to keep doing, because I have up until this point, like the kids have been with me in the apartments. They've been to the banks, they've been like pitching, they've been to real estate meetings and happenings and events. And ever since I was pregnant with them and when they were babies, and even now, like Lucas is helping me paint, and Stella's, she knows how to use a nail gun.
Nice.
She's 4 years old. So I want them to see me passionate, but I also don't want to be like screaming at them every day, which happens when they're home 8 hours a day or like 24 hours a day. So I'm still working on that, how I can get both pieces of the pie. How do you say it? Eat the pie and keep it too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have your cake and eat it too. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, it's a work in progress for all of us, but I just want to give encouragement. I think your story is an encouragement, Maria, for a lot of parents, a lot of, and moms in particular, because that's your kind of version of the story that you can, it's not going to be perfect, but you can find your own and insert your own identity in different things. And I think that's really inspiring. Thank
you. And I want to throw in something also about my spouse, Visa. I think we've been married for 18 years, that's a long time. And at some point, you don't even realize how you're changing after like 5 years have gone, and you're like, wait, who are you even? Like, we're different. What happened? And when you work an intense job like he got sucked into it real big because he was really good at it, and he traveled 150 days a year. But then one day I ended up in the hospital and was close to dying. And the next day he calls me. He's like, "Hey, it's Stella's birthday tomorrow. Like, what do I buy her?" Like, he didn't even know. Like, he didn't know what his 2-year-old daughter liked. So I think that was one thing. And then also, especially in America, I think there's something with men feeling like they have to be like the providers of the family, or like Papa Bear, like just. So I told him, I'm like, "Hey, man, don't feel like that I need this from you, that I need us to have this money from your job. Like, we can figure something out, and I'd rather live somewhere else, or like make other decisions and have you be around more." So I think that was a conversation. He doesn't remember it because his mind was kind of, explains everything, because he was so into just work and stuff. But I also told him, like, when you're home, your energy is so funky. It's like easier not to have you home. I'd rather like run my own. I think it was a C corporation or something like that I was running, and 10 apartments that I was landlording, and had 2 babies and was pregnant and ran the household, like all the finances of the household and everything. And I'm like, can you just not be home? Like, it helps not to have you here, like drain us of your energy just sitting with this phone.
Yep.
So I think that was the last drop.
Yeah. Okay, it was kind of the from a turning point, that the work and this financial independence thing is not only about, going to some vacation destination. It's about like our lifestyle and our relationships and how it affects us, right?
Yeah, and decisions. I'm like, hey, what would happen if we didn't live in this house and maybe put it up for rent? And in Finland, you don't have to amortize your loan. Always, you can pause it. I'm like, hey, what if we don't amortize this a little bit? And all of a sudden, we're like, oh. Also, if we moved to Bali, like we could live so much cheaper. Like, all these things. Like, if you start asking yourself the question, wouldn't it be cool if, and then something like that. Yeah, just dreaming.
Well, I want to go back because this has been wonderful. I love the kind of where we've gone all over the place on this conversation, but I think people are going to be curious about your personal real estate journey, because you've kind of hit a few little details on it. So you had the Fort Collins house.
Yeah.
You became a mom. You decided to move back to Finland. I believe that's the part of the story I want to connect. And from there, this is the part where you're like, all right, I'm gonna invest. And so did you start a business of renting properties and flipping properties there in Finland? Was that and what did that look like just in general? What kind of business was that?
Yeah. So I started doing it personally. So I bought an apartment that was a satellite city to Helsinki, not too far away from us. And I did a BRRRR of that. So I studied the markets for 3 months. I read all the books and started going to local meetups, because I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know anything about the market and anything. So brought the baby as I was pregnant, renovated that, just super basic stuff, but started doing DIY things, and burned money out of it, and got the next one, got my brother on board as well. So I had other people's money to play with, and that helped getting loans, because, at that point I was like, every time I say it, I'm like, it feels bad. Like, I was a stay-at-home mom, and somehow like that eats on my identity, and that feels bad that I feel that way. But I'm being honest. I have huge respect for stay-at-home moms, but for me that was hard. Yeah.
And you had, and practically speaking, when you walked into a bank, maybe you could tell that story too. I love that story where you brought your baby but so like you're walking into a bank and there's that identity thing of like, all right, I don't have any income on my own yet, and so I'm having to go bring my brother and my so that was so creative for you to do that. But like, tell me about that conversation you had with this banker while you have the baby sitting there with you.
Yeah, it's funky. Like, all the things that I did, I did out of shame because I'm like, well, I don't have a job. Like, I don't have an income. I'm worthless, was kind of the stories I was telling myself. And the drive was, I need to make up for the salary I don't have anymore. And what ended up happening, I was doing all these like creative financing things. Now looking back, I'm like, that was actually really cool. And awesome. So one of them was, I always try to see like, what are ways I can get more money? And one was having partners. So I had equity partners, and then I borrowed money, so private money, and then I at some point when I had done all these private deals, I realized that side was kind of drying up for me, that I couldn't get any loans on my private side, and also my husband was starting to get maxed out, like from a debt to income ratio. Well, we had a pretty substantial portfolio at this time. So I'm like, okay, so what's the next step? What else can I do? I'm like, okay, I can start a company, because that way the debt to income ratio will not be an issue. So I bring my baby, go to the bank with my newly founded company. And up until this point, I've said it's an LLC, but it's actually more of like a C corp, or what are the different versions?
Yeah, there's a C corp is like Berkshire Hathaway or Apple, but then you have a S corporation.
S corp, that's the one.
It's like a hybrid between a LLC and a corporation.
S corp, right? So we've got shares and all that. So it's not quite as simple as an LLC, but more paperwork. Ugh. Anyway, so I come in, I've got my corporation, and I've got my baby that I completely forget about that I have, because I'm like pitch mode. So I go in and I start pitching. I've got my business plan, and it's like 25 pages long with all the graphs and everything. And then after we're done, the banker like looks down and he takes off something off of his shoe and brings it up, and he's like, I believe this is yours. And it's like a feminine pad that had gotten stuck to his foot. And my daughter had completely like wreaked havoc in my purse, pulled all the like food and juice boxes. It was like a mess under the table. But he had like 6 kids of his own, so he was totally cool with that. And which was one of the reasons I had chosen him as a banker in the first place to meet with. So I went in trying to get a loan for $400,000, and I came out with a $550,000.
Yay, that's awesome.
Loan, and that enabled me to. Now I had 2 avenues to go, like, okay, whenever I could get loan on the private side, that's where I go. Whenever I could get loan on the business side, that's where I'd go. So that's just one thing to remember, that there are several tools in your tool belt they can use.
Right. I find it so interesting, like that situation you were in where you don't have income coming in, you're staying at home. There's the identity, oh man, I need to go have income. I'm worthless because I don't have the income coming in. And yet you mentioned it's like that very challenge that you had personally, psychologically, like turned into your almost like your superhero role. Like because of that, you became this creative, thinking outside the box, doing what you got to do, bring the baby along investor. Like what a transformation. And I'm so glad you shared that story, because I think everybody has their own version of that story, whatever it might be. Like mine was I'm a 22-year-old kid right out of college. I don't have a job. I'm walking into the bank and like, I said, I'm a real estate investor. This is what I do. And they're like, where's your tax return? I'm like, what? I don't have a tax return. I'm going to go flip houses, And so that was like my version of it. I would try to wear a little bit nicer clothes. I try to I gave up wearing I wear t-shirts now. I'm like, forget that crap. If I walk into a bank, I'm wearing a t-shirt and I'm wearing what I wear. And then, like at that point, I'm like, whatever I got to wear, to try to, be a poser, impress people. Right. But I just think that's like, we all are going to have our versions, but particularly like I really appreciate that, and I want to it's a little bit of a segue, but I think it's relevant to the role you were playing at that point. Is you were one of the contributors to a book called The Only Woman in the Room, which I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes as well. Just a fantastic assemblage of different stories, but from the point of view of women in real estate investing, being the only woman in the room and having a kind of a male oriented, dominated finance, real estate. I just was hoping you could speak a little bit to that perspective and that experience that I think is relevant for what a lot of people are going through.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's one of the many things that have come out of me flying across the world to Nashville 2 years ago when I saw you on stage for the first time.
Right. Yeah.
That's also where I met Ashley Wilson, who compiled the book. And people are like, how are you in this book? This random chick from Finland. And I'm like, I'll tell you how I'm in the book. I made an awesome boob joke in Nashville that Ashley heard. And she's like, I like you. And I'm like 100% sure that that's why I'm in the book, because of this one boob joke that I made. But to answer your question, I want to start by, I read this quote, Maya Angelou, the poet.
Yes.
She says, if you're always trying to be normal, you'll never know how amazing you can be. So for me, the way I see it as a woman in many situations, you have a superpower, right? For this longest period of time, we've tried to like fit in and like be normal, and in this situation, it means like be like men or whatever. And I'm like, no, actually, like we can be different and have our superpower in that. So I've maybe seen that as an opportunity. That's been one of the reasons maybe that I've been able to do things differently, because I've brought some of like my warmth and like soft sides into business. So you asked me what kind of business I did in Finland, and it's I do buy and holds. So I have rentals, and my motto is I want to create homes with heart and do landlording with love. And it's like, oh, what? And I'm like, I'm in the business of doing good. And if people say like, this is not a charity, this is a business. And I'm like, do you know what charity means? Charity means doing good. And if my business is not doing good, then it's not a business I want to be in. So that's a long ass winded way to answer a question. It probably doesn't even answer a question. So I think I'm one of the lucky women in that book that has grown up in a country that's very equal. So in Finland, actually, we are 50-50% when it comes to like female landlords versus male. When you go to real estate happenings, it's going to be 50% female. I have real estate investor mentors that are female. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important for me to talk about that internationally, because I see we're not quite there yet in the US. And especially if you go to events here. Yeah. And that's what happened to Ashley. She's like, how can we be at an event and there's like hundreds of people here and all women can fit at one table? Because they were like 18 women. She's like, I'm going to write a book about this. And that's how the book came to be. I've also taken advantage of that. So, to tell you a story, I was working on one apartment, DIY renovating. It was a gut reno. So I was tearing down the kitchen. And before that, I had the asbestos checked. And this older man comes in to do the asbestos test. And he looks at me and he's like, who's doing the demo? And I'm like, I am. He looks at me like up and down, like this is scrawny. If you can't see me, I'm pretty scrawny, or have been at least. And he's like, I can help you with that. So he's like stays and like does demo with me for an hour, doesn't charge me. Like that wouldn't have happened if I were a man. So I think, yeah, sometimes it's good to remember it can be a perk to be a female in the business too.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm just repeating part of what I heard there of being unique. Whatever happens to be your uniqueness. Like we're being a woman, but also I've had a lot of interviews with people who come from different cultural backgrounds. And I think one of the beautiful trends I hope right now is that we're beginning to see that we all can kind of own who we are and our own uniqueness. And still, there's plenty of room here. There's plenty of room at the table. There's plenty of room for there to be 50-50 men and women, because that's what our, the population is almost that, right? And so I really appreciate what Ashley's done. I appreciate what you're doing to share your stories. Like I'm curious if you have any other ideas on how we can encourage more women in real estate investing to feel like there is room at the table for them. But I think that book and the stories and just you sharing, like your Instagram channel is amazing. Like people can follow you. I'm going to put a link there. Just, see what these amazing investors are doing. Like it's not whether they're man or woman. It's just an investor who's doing some amazing work and doing it in their own way and doing it with warmth. And so it's just, I think that's hopefully that sharing is getting out there.
Yeah, I think you're doing it now, right? Just having me on and talking about it is one, and for younger women to see themselves in something they want to aspire to. I think that's how we get started. And also, I love the metaphor of like reaching your hands up and down type of thing. So once you get somewhere, make sure to reach your hand down and pull the next one up with you. So I think that's on all of us.
Yeah. So speaking of that second mountain we were talking about earlier, like that's part of the game, right? Like let's pull some other people up the mountain with us, and let's not have it be lonely at the top of the mountain. We want more people to be multimillionaires, and we want more people to have this freedom and flexibility and go on sabbaticals like you're doing right now. And so let's talk about that. And I'm sorry for bringing this back full circle, but in the very beginning, we said you're there in Fort Collins. You've been on this journey where you came to the United States, got the green card lottery, you've climbed your way up the corporate ladder, you started buying properties, you've started a family, you started a business back in Finland. Like you're all over the place, and now here you're coming back. You decided to come back to the United States, and this year. So maybe you could just tell me a little bit about what you're doing this year, where you are, and kind of how that's come back full circle now.
Yeah. Well, it's been last year, 2021 was a year of growth for sure. Growing hurts, man. But it was also one of the best years. So we, in July, came to Fort Collins to live in, renovate the house that we bought 6 years ago with the kids, 4 and 5 years old at that time, at home full time. And for the first time, my husband Visa, so he took a sabbatical. He's a full-time student. He's working on the project with me. So for the first time, we're doing this together. And I completely forget sometimes that he's a noob. Mm-hmm. And that's been interesting, and I can talk a lot about that, but I won't. we can get back to it. And we came into it thinking that this is going to be a fun year, and it became so hard, and we had to pause, and we're like, why is this not joyful? Like, we came to look for joy, and we realized that we're again trying to do everything ourselves. Like, why do we keep doing this? And that's when we got help. So we got a full-time handyman, Bill, who worked with us now for like 2 or 3 months, and that just changed everything again. So I think that's one, like, let's not try to do everything ourselves. And then Brian and Brandon, a couple of friends that I met through Instagram, my husband's like, you real estate investors are so much on social media, like, why? And I think you said it. You said it. We love sharing and helping others, right? We want to show what we do so we can like help others learn from our mistakes. So that's one mistake again. Don't try to save. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. And that comes to time as well. So we spent too much time doing this, and now we're getting ready to sell it. So we have more adventure ahead of us. Yeah, but I haven't talked about that yet, but we're actually going from here to Austin, to Texas.
Okay. Yeah. Fun. All right. So the Fort Collins part of your journey is you bought this property for $280,000-$285,000 back.
Yeah.
When you started your corporate job. You've been renting it out since then. Now you're fixing it up, and so you're living in it. So this is a property that can be it can be flipped at this point, so you can sell it.
Yeah.
And so you'll get those proceeds. And you said that's gone up now to what, 600,000 or more? Like,
yeah. Okay, so let me talk about it more from a real estate investment standpoint. Like you said, yeah, we bought it for 285, and I thought we're gonna come in here, we're gonna do a slight renovation, maybe paint the walls a little bit, and put in maybe 30,000, be in and out in 3 months. We were supposed to go back to Finland in October, and we're like, I don't know what we were thinking that we were able to do that with two kids at home all the time. Also, we realized this is a big ass house. A total of like 11 rooms. Everything had to be touched. This has been a rental for probably 15 years. So it was a lot more work than we first thought. I haven't worked on houses before. It's been apartments. So that was also new. A whole exterior.
Yep.
So I had budgeted $30,000. We also noticed a shift in the market. So when we came, we thought we were capped at 500,000 because of the market around us. Nothing had been sold over 5. Now it's so hot that houses have been sold for even 660,000. Close by, same specs. So we're like, okay, what do we need to do to qualify for over 600? And that's where we realized, okay, we need to check all the boxes. We need to have AC. So we just had it installed for $6,000. And it seems crazy, but now we're taking a chance of like getting into the higher tier of buyers and price. So now we're over $100,000 in the renovation cost, and 6 months as opposed to 3 months. But it was both, yeah.
That's the remodel world, yeah. Well, you're doing better than me. I had a triplex. I got back into the remodel game last year, and I documented a lot on YouTube. And it was supposed to be a $120,000 project that got into a $200,000 project, and we redid the foundation, and it was just my God, I was so sick of that project by the time it got done. But it's rented now, and we're good. But so you're.
Oh, you didn't sell it?
No, we rented it out, but it was cool. Same kind of deal though. Like 12 months instead of 4 months, and 200,000 instead of 120.
Holy cow. Yeah. I think it's good for people to hear that, it's not unheard of that these things happen. Yeah. But part of it was also a choice, right? Because we saw the opportunity that we can actually, we bought it for 285. We put 100 in, or maybe 120. We'll see where we end up, and looking to sell it for 600, maybe 650. That's still an awesome deal. Yeah. So, and it's also, we're like, this is practicing for us. This is the first house in the US. And the first house for Visa. So we've had it's been a good school.
Yeah, love it.
And that, can I say one more thing?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Maybe people are wondering why we're selling it. And that's a journey that I made before coming here. And there were 3 reasons. 1, the return on equity is too low. And so we've done, the way we funded or financed the renovation is, 1, I did private money, got a loan for that. And then the other one, because I don't keep too much cash, my allocation is pretty low when it comes to cash. And so we did private money. And then the other one is we did a home equity line of credit, which was possible even though we don't have income here in the US, by the way.
Nice.
So
we
won't ever. I'm like, let's try.
Let's try it.
Yeah. So there you go. So local credit unions. That's where you should go. So the return on equity was too low. Number 2, it gave us a headache because we're American citizens, but we live in Finland, so we get double taxed. So having income in the US, that was a headache. So if a property gives you a headache, that's also a good reason to maybe think about letting it go. Yeah. And also, what was the third one? I think I said 3.
Those are 2 good. The money and the headaches, those are good enough for me. But if there might be another one too,
I think maybe the third one was the cash flow. So if we're looking into a life of freedom, we want to focus more on cash flow. Yeah.
Well, Maria, this has been so much fun for me, getting to connect with you and do it in as close to real life as, we met in Nashville, but like to get to hear your story in more detail, to share it with everyone, to get your insights, your wisdom, your quirkiness, your fun, like all of these things. I love it. I think it's so much fun and really appreciate it. The final question I always like to ask my guests is this is a show about financial independence and all the different ways it looks for people. But a lot of people, particularly we're trying to talk to, are people in the middle of that journey. Like they're in that grind of maybe they're still at the job you were at. Maybe they're a parent. Maybe they're just kind of figuring out how to start their business as a parent. I'm just wondering if you have any final advice for them on that journey to financial independence that might be helpful.
Have you ever been in a situation you talked about that you have this imposter syndrome of like, I wrote a book on it and I'm still kind of learning. I have a lot of that. So one question that has helped me deal with that and also helped me deal with grief. So it helps both ways and I'll explain it, but it's why not me? So why couldn't it be me who quit their job? Or why wouldn't I become a millionaire? Or why wouldn't I be able to homeschool my kids? Or like, why not me? Why wouldn't I be the one writing this book? Or why wouldn't I be the one interviewed on this podcast? Whatever it may be. And if you actually have a response to that, like, well, because, well, then number one, you can ask yourself, is that true? Is that really true? What if it weren't true? What can I do to not make it true? Then you have a game plan. And when I said it goes both ways, right? So if something bad happens to you, why not you? Instead of spending time on, oh gosh, why did these tenants ruin my house? I'm like, well, why not you? It happens. It's a part of life. So that's just a simple little tool that has helped me get through both, positives and negatives.
No, that's so powerful, and I've taken a lot of notes on this one, Maria. And during this interview, that might be the best one for me. It's just
cool.
Asking yourself that question and thinking about it. So thank you for that advice. That's wonderful. And I hope we can stay connected and stay in touch and find out about your next steps of your journey. And I'm going to have links to your Instagram channel. I'm going to have links to for people to stay in touch with you. But just I want to give you a chance to hand off if you have any other any words on where people should stay in touch with you or where you'd like them to follow you after this interview.
Yeah, so Maria Loves Real Estate is my Instagram handle, and that's where I'm the most active. I do try to respond to comments and messages. I'm behind, but I do my best. And if you want to read more about the first 8 properties that I bought with numbers and pictures and all that, I wrote an article on that called The Nitty Gritty of My 8 First Real Estate Investments or something like that. So it's on Bigger Pockets. So you can Google Bigger Pockets, Maria Fristro, or like Nitty Gritty Bigger Pockets, and that'll come up. That's, I think, maybe a good one.
Great. Well, I will put a link to that article as well. And Maria, wish you the best of luck with your next steps and with what you got going on. And again, thank you for being here. It's great talking to you.
Well, thank you. You're a big reason I'm here. So eternally grateful.
Thank you.
Thanks
Appreciate
so much.
that. Yes. Stay in touch. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.